Okay, so we're now recording, and this is a meeting of the Jijang Bosal Book Club. It's August 22nd. On 2023, we're talking about Zhiru Ng's book, The Making of a Savior Bodhisattva, Dizang in Medieval China, and we're talking about chapter 1. We might actually get into a little bit of chapter 2 tonight, depending on how things go. But I'm going to share my screen now. And oh yeah, that's right. So the traditional way of starting this class is by actually chanting the Jijang Bosal chant, which sometimes I forget, which I really shouldn't, but I do. Let's see. So where is, not here. There it is. Okay, sorry about that. Now I'm ready. Zoom hasn't crashed yet. Okay, so now I'm gonna share the screen, put up the chant. Here we go. Everybody can see my screen now, right? Okay.
Jijang Bosal, Jijang Bosal, Jijang Bosal, Jijang Jijang Bosal, 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 Jijang Bosal. Yorokchanjanani, Om Bharamani Jani Sabaha, Om Bharamani Jani Sabaha, Om Bharamani Jani Sabaha, Om Shunturjino Mamoka, Salvadara Sadaya, Shive Hum, Om Mamoka, Salvadara Sadaya, Shive Hum, Om Mamoka, Salvadara Sadaya, Shive Hum, Sosotegyo Sandarani, Nam Samanda Motanam, Abaraji Hadasa, Sananam Danyata, Om Kaka Kai Kai Hum Hum Abara, Abara Bara 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 Bara, Chitta Chitta Chiri Chiri Pada Pada Sanjie, Shiriye Sabaha, Namu Samanda Motanam, Abaraji Hadasa, Sananam Danyata, Om Kaka Kai Kai Hum Hum Abara, Abara Bara 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 Bara, Chitta Chitta Chiri Chiri Pada Pada Sanjie, Shiriye Sabaha, Namu Samanda Motanam, Abaraji Hadasa, Sadanam Danyata, Om Kaka Kai Kai Hum Hum Abara, Abara Bara 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 Bara, Chitta Chitta Chiri Chiri Pada Pada Sanjie, Shiriye Sabaha, Bobo Jino Om Horo Horo Saya Roke Sabaha, Om Horo Horo Saya Roke Sabaha, Om Horo Horo Saya Roke Sabaha, Bobo Nyang Jino Om Samara Samara Mimara, Charama Jagora Bara Hum, Om Samara Samara Mimara, Charama Jagora Bara Hum, Om Samara Samara Mimara, Charama Jagora Bara Hum, Chakshil Chunmyong Gasuji, Dehe Jungsu Kahunjin, Ogongayang Bungaye, Monung Jinsol,
Oh, so I'm leaving this up here for a second because I want to go back. So I mentioned this last time, but there's actually, oh yeah, I think it is here. Yeah, I just want to point out where a line from this chant actually shows up in. Where now? Can I find it in the book now? No, it's in the introduction. And here it is. Yeah. So this is the teacher of the desolate darkness. You can see this, right? I'm indicating. All right. This and when we chant this in the Sino-Korean pronunciation, this is and make sure I'm getting the right Namu. Okay, yes, the second Namu, Yumyong Gyoju, which in the opinion, in the Mandarin pronunciation, Yuming Jiaozhu, something like that. In the Sino-Korean, it's Yu Myung Gyoju. So when we chant Namu Nambang Hwaju Jijang Bosal, that's the first Namu, the first we bow to. Namu Yu Myung Gyoju Jijang Bosal. We're saying we pay homage to the teacher of the desolate darkness is one way of mysterious darkness, scary places, whatever. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that overlap between, yeah. Oh, what is this? Oh yeah, so this is, now let's go to the slides. Okay, so but before I jump right into the slides, which I'm right on the verge of doing, we're continuing on to discuss chapter 1, early scriptural representation, texts and contexts. Does anyone have any questions or anything they want to bring up, or anything that you've thought of, or yeah? Well, Camille, good.
Is there a English translation of the chant, like, because it's separate than what we originally went over, which was like the vows of samsara?
Yeah. There are yes. The answer is yes, and in fact, I could put in a plug here. Let me find something here to show you. Yeah, like I said, I'm going to put in a plug. So this is my blog, themindisbuddha.org. If you go here and you do a search on Jijang, get a bunch of stuff, but one of them will be the Jijang Bosal Book Club, a plug for this class. Let's see, names of Chittagarbha, Jijang Bosal. Let's see, does this have, let me see if I put the English in here. Oh yeah, it doesn't have, let's see. It doesn't have the English. Let's see. Where do I have the English? Do I have the English? Okay, I'll have to work on that. But the I've got it somewhere. But yeah, I should provide that to everybody in this class, and also I should put that somewhere. I've got the Jijang Bosal chant up on my blog, and there is a oh yeah, so there is a document that Zen Master Stanley Lombardo of the Kansas City Zen Center has up, where he has a lot of the he has actually pretty good word for word translations of the chants, but I don't believe he provides that for the Jijang Bosal chant in that document. So I'll look for it. And so a lot of the chant is mantras. The titles of the mantras are translatable. Parts of the mantras are, you can like say what the Sanskrit is or whatever, but translating the mantras is a bit sketchy. But yeah. Okay, so any other questions or things you want to bring up about this chapter or Jijang Bosal in general? Okay, I will. Let's see. Okay. All right. So, like I said, we're talking about chapter 1, and so. When Camille first started asking that question, I thought she was going to ask, is there an English translation of this sutra on the 10 wheels? Which the answer to that is no. But one thing I am going to do, and I made a reference to this in the last class, I'm going to go in more detail over an English language summary that does exist on the web that you can find. It's part of the it's from a newsletter that's published by the City of 10,000 Buddhists in California, which is a major Chinese Buddhist group in the United States, and I'm going to be talking about that very, very, very soon. So in this class tonight, we're going to talk about. So the Sutra on the 10 Wheels is very important for understanding Dizang in China and in East Asia in general. Very important, and it's also quite central to Zhiru Ng's book. So it's worth, and there isn't an English translation of it, so it's worth going over and having a better idea. She provides some translations of some passages in chapter 1. But you know, it's good to have a better idea of what's really going on. For example, and I mentioned this last time, she doesn't really explain what the wheels are. What are these wheels? Why wheels? And actually, so if you look at the Sanskrit title of the sutra on the 10 wheels, it's the Dasa Chakra Sutra. Dasa is 10 in Sanskrit. Chakra is wheel. Chakras, like as in chakras, as in align your chakras, which I guess if when people have their tires aligned in Sanskrit, do they get their chakras aligned? I don't know. How does it anyway? Okay, so and balanced and aligned. That sounds good, right? To get your chakras balanced and aligned. Okay. And we'll talk about, what there are some, and the different meanings of wheels actually will come up even more in the next chapter, where talk about wheels as in another meaning of the word wheel in both in Chinese and in Sanskrit is a top. And so there are divination methods that are supposed to help you. Well, we'll talk about that. We probably won't talk about that too much, but they use wheels as in tops that you spin, and they're like dice. Anyway, so recall what this first part of the book is about. I must have copied some sort of non-recognizable character there, but part 1 introduces and analyzes the early manifestations of Dizang in China from the 6th to 8th centuries based on the early scripture representations of Dizang in the scripture on the 10 wheels and the Zhizang Fen section on the Sumer treasury. The scripture on the 10 wheels inspired the basis for early cultic beginnings, including links to Sanjie jiao, which hopefully there'll be time to talk a little bit more about Sanjie jiao. We'll definitely talk about it in our next class, because that's a major topic in chapter 2. In this early phase of the Dizang cult, the Chinese religious imagination was already at work crafting the identity and history of the Bodhisattva, particularly in response to socio-political conditions of the 5th and 6th century China. The scripture on the 10 wheels inspired innovative visual imagery, like this right here, including the Sanjie representation of Dizang as a Buddha surrounded by the 6 paths of rebirth. That's what this figure is right here. Okay, so now last time I mentioned and just kind of barely mentioned this online, very nice online article. It's actually a 2-part article in the online newsletter for the City of 10,000 Buddhists. And here's the URL to get the first part of this 2-part article by a Dharma Master Heng Yi, who was a student of Xuanhua, Master Xuanhua, who was the founder of the City of 10,000 Buddhists. I think I'm getting that right. Okay, so this is a quote from Master Heng Yi's article. What are the 10 wheels? So this is one answer to this question. They are the 10 deeds, 3 from the body, 4 from the mouth, 3 from the mind. The good we do are the 10 wholesome deeds, and the evil we do are the 10 unwholesome deeds. The Sutra of the 10 Wheels of the Earth Store Bodhisattva, which is the more complete title of the sutra, teaches us how to counteract our unwholesome deeds with the 10 wheels as taught by the Buddha. These teachings can be applied to our daily lives and are very helpful for our cultivation. Okay. So before going back to more from Master Heng Yi and his explanation of the Sutra on the 10 Wheels, I want to talk a little bit more about the 10 unwholesome, or the 10 wholesome and the 10 unwholesome deeds. Now, this is a very standard Buddhist teaching, and so this, what I'm about to start talking about, comes from a Pali Sutta, the Desolate Sutta. This is a direct link to where you can read the entire sutta online in English, and this sutta talks a lot about the 10 unwholesome deeds and the 10 wholesome deeds. And so a group of lay people came, and lay people who were not Buddhists. They'd heard about this guy, the Buddha, and they came to talk to him. And they asked, what is the reason? What is the condition? Why some beings here, upon the dissolution of the body, after death, reappear in states of deprivation, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell? And what is the reason? What is the condition why some people here, on the dissolution of the body after death, reappear in a happy destination, even in the heavenly world? Okay, so while this is from a Pali Sutta, it's very reminiscent of the themes and concerns that are in the Kshitigarbha Sutra. Kshitigarbha Sutra is especially concerned with why do people end up in a bad state after death. And so the Buddha answers them, householders, he addresses them. It is by reason of conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma. By reason of Dhamma, of course, is the Pali way of saying Dharma. Or as the Pali people would say, Sanskrit is, or Dharma is the Sanskrit way of saying Dhamma. Anyway, by reason of unrighteous conduct, that beings here on the dissolution of the body after death reappear in states of deprivation, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. It is by reason of conduct in accordance with the Dhamma, by reason of righteous conduct, that some beings here on the dissolution of the body after death reappear in happy destination, even in the heavenly world. There are 3 kinds of bodily conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma, unrighteous conduct. There are 4 kinds of verbal conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma. There are 3 kinds of mental conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma. Okay, and so this is a very standard. I don't know. I don't want to put anybody on the. Who here has heard of this teaching before? The 10 unwholesome deeds, the 10 wholesome deeds. Okay, this is a very so this is a lot of times, if your primary exposure to Buddhism is by way of Zen Buddhism, often people end up not knowing much about Buddhism if their primary exposure is by way of Zen Buddhism. If you're exposed to any other kind, and if you're exposed to Zen Buddhism and you are Vietnamese or Chinese or Japanese or Chinese, or if you are exposed to any other kind of Buddhism as a Westerner, you would know about. Yeah, go ahead, Camille.
How does this differ from like the 5 precepts?
Yeah.
I guess that's what I would speak.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot of overlap, and the precepts are going to come up when we talk about the. So they're not going to come up when we talk about the 10 wholesome and unwholesome deeds. Well, they will. They'll be mentioned kind of tangentially. But when we talk about the 10 wheels, one of the wheels is precepts. It turns out. But yeah, so there's Buddha, a lot of Buddhist teaching has to do with right conduct, ethics, and so there's uh, so Buddhism is big on ethics and conduct. Buddhism is also big on lists, but Buddhism is also, in my opinion, very big on coming up with lots of different ways of saying things and not relying upon just one single formulation of phrasing and rephrasing. I mean, the Buddha taught for almost 50 years, and he repeated himself a lot. And even when he repeated himself, he often worded things somewhat differently. Um, and then people have had 2,500 years to say what they think he was saying, So so precepts are this completely. It all has to do with conduct. So yeah, precepts are part of it, but it's not the same list. It's a different list. Okay. Oh yeah. Speaking of which, the three kinds of bodily conduct not in accordance with the Dharma. Okay, these are pretty straightforward: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. Okay, those are precepts as well, right? There are four kinds of verbal conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma: speaking falsehoods, speaking maliciously, speaking harshly, and gossip. And a lot of times it's difficult to say where one of these ends and the other one begins. Killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct are pretty clearly differentiated. But speaking maliciously, speaking maliciously. So here, speaking maliciously is more specifically talking about creating divisions. So it's one thing to be harsh in your speech, to be critical of people. It's another thing to be divisive, to try to pit people against each other, to try to create groups, and groupings, to try to group people around you, and then identify other people as being not in your group. That kind of. So this would be more divisive than just generically malicious speech. And harsh speech, rough, hard, hurtful, and this is very common too, and is not really exactly the same thing as divisive speech. You just go around putting people down, basically. um, uh, yeah. Gossip, of course, is another. Let's see. So we got malicious. Oh yeah, and then the first one is just falsehoods, lying. Okay, and then gossip. And this one I think is interesting, because a lot of the verbal behavior that human beings engage in is socializing. Is kind of sharing. And so when gossip is malicious or just idle, that's one thing. But a lot of times we use language in a social way to kind of say, hi, how are you? Hey, did you hear about this? And as soon as you say, hey, did you hear about, so and so, it's not necessarily gossip. It's only gossip if it's, at least in my opinion, if it's, you know, has some sort of bad intention behind it. And okay, I admit it. I like to gossip. There. And Buddhists have some good gossip. There's great Buddhists have good gossip. I'll tell you. Anyway, okay. So that's bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, mental misconduct. Now, and this is kind of important. And this isn't in this article. I don't think Master, what's his name, Heng Yi, makes a point of pointing this out. But this is the important one. I mean, not that the other. I mean, these are obviously important, because these are ways that you actually cause harm to others. Okay, but where does it come from? Where does malicious speech? Where does harsh speech? Where does malicious gossip? Where does falsehoods? Where does killing? Where does stealing? Where does sexual misconduct come from? Originally, it originates with mental misconduct, and so, but. But here, the specific three kinds of mental conduct not in accordance with the Dharma are what we call in the Four Great Vows. So, in one version of the Four Great Vows says, greed, hatred, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them. So, greed, covetousness, hatred, and ignorance, wrong views, distorted vision. And so, these are considered to be the origin of all bad actions, including bad speech and bad physical actions that cause harm to others. And one of the reasons why it's kind of important to emphasize this is because mental thoughts are considered actions in Buddhism. So it's not like, oh, I just thought about it, but I didn't do it. And that on the one hand, it's very important to recognize that that's good, right? If you just thought about it, but you didn't do it. Or I just said it, but I didn't actually punch him in the nose, right? I mean, that's good. But at the same time, these are all considered to be important. And the origin of the bad actions is in greed, hatred, and ignorance. Okay, so this is not the 10 wheels. This is the 10 unwholesome deeds, all right? And the sutta goes on a little bit. If a householder who observes conduct, and so the sutta, in addition to listing the 10 unwholesome deeds, it also lists the 10 wholesome deeds, which are kind of easy to guess if once you've seen the list of unwholesome deeds. And then I'm skipping ahead. If a householder who observes conduct in accordance with the Dhamma, righteous conduct, should wish, oh, that on the dissolution of the body after death, I might appear in the company of the warrior nobles of great property. And so now what follows here is a list of all the good things that can come to you if you act in accord with the 10 wholesome deeds. And there's actually quite a long list. One of the reasons why the list is so long is because it lists all of these heavenly realms that you can be reborn in. And I wanted to point this out because if you look at, if you look at the Kshitigarbha Sutra, which we read earlier, if you look at the Lotus Sutra, the chapter on all of the benefits that you can have from praying to, paying homage to, venerating Kuan Yin, this is very similar. This is a list of the benefits that you can get, including, in particular, in your future incarnations from your conduct. Let's see. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the 10 Wheels Sutta. But at this point, I want to take a 5-minute break. Then we'll come back and we'll talk a lot more about the 10 Wheels Sutra. Okay? let's talk more specifically about the Ten Wheels Sutra. I'll just go back. Is it the 10 unwholesome deeds? The first three, which are deeds of the body, those are covered by the precepts. The next four, the unwholesome deeds of speech, are part of them are covered by the precepts, lying. The five precepts don't specifically mention other forms of verbal bad behavior other than lying. And then the last three, the unwholesome deeds of the mind, those are the three poisons: greed, hatred, and ignorance. Okay, I'll just summarize. So that is good to know, in my opinion. Current slide. And okay, so here is what's going on in the Ten Wheels Sutra. Earth Store Bodhisattva, aka Kshitigarbha, aka Dizang, aka Jijang, aka Jizo, consulted the Buddha, saying that he had painstakingly cultivated ascetic practices for the past 13 kalpas and had been making vows to help living beings eradicate the 3 calamities and the 5 turbidities. And that's another thing you can look up. Actually, no, I don't think I do. He really wanted to help living beings transcend the mire of filth, and having experienced so much throughout so many lands, he wondered why this land, the Saha world. The Chinese here is a little interesting. This is Sa, this is Ha, as in Sabaha. The Saha, and this is world. This is these two characters here, Shi, Ge, something like that, in Sino-Korean. If you do a Google image search on these 2 characters, you'll get pictures of the planet Earth. So this is a Saha world. Why this land, the Saha world, is plagued by so much evil and unwholesome karma? Why in this land do living beings slander the proper Dharma, harbor evil views, speak so many falsehoods? As a result, they have committed limitless evil karma and so forth. Why should living beings act this way? So he consulted the Buddha. Buddha, how do you turn the Dharma wheel, another meaning of the wheel, in such an evil world filled with 5 turbidities? How do you liberate living beings? How do you help living beings break free from their never-ending afflictions? Okay. And so the Buddha then explained to Kshitigarbha the 10 methods, which are also the 10 wheels perfected by the Tathagata, that is the Buddha. So the first wheel, this wheel is to establish the Dharma, to teach and transform living beings. This is called the first wheel of the Buddha, which is first creating this Dharma to teach and transform living beings. That's basic. That's kind of the catch-all, teaching the Dharma that is taught by the Buddha is the first wheel. But that's not enough. The question from Kshitigarbha requires more specificity than that. So the second wheel is sitting meditation, chanting and sutra recitation, and making offerings. These are 3 specific kinds of practices. And in the third practice on making offerings, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, there's an emphasis on making offerings and the benefits that sentient beings receive as a result of making offerings. The third wheel is the precepts. The fourth wheel is actually a list of different teachings that are all subsumed under the title of proper Dharma, taking refuge in the 3 jewel, the 10 wholesome dharmas, which is actually not exactly the same thing as the 10 wholesome deeds, the 10 wholesome dharmas. The 6 paramitas are there, and then there's a bunch of other things, the 4 of this, the 4 of that, etc. The 5th wheel is teachings and practices to overcome fear. I think I'm going to talk more about that in a minute too. or no. The Buddha also taught methods of steadying the mind of his students, of the Shravakas, so that they could more easily enter samadhi. And as a result of his students being able to, as a result of his students being so easily able to enter samadhi, this was witnessed by other evil beings, including evil human beings, but especially dragons, yakshas, ghosts, and other living beings harboring evil thoughts. They were deeply affected by witnessing how easy it was for the Buddha's students to attain samadhi. And their minds then began to turn towards the Dharma because of that. So that's the sixth wheel. The seventh wheel, so the seventh wheel is all about oh, good. So it's not going to record again. Okay, good. So the seventh wheel is to remember to plug in your power cord when giving a presentation online. And I'm going to share my screen again. Let's see. Oh, yeah, good. Unfortunately, I have the Zoom meeting configured so that it doesn't end just because I suddenly leave the building. Okay, all right. So, okay, the seventh wheel is to use expedient means to teach these living beings in accordance with their capacities and their different conditions. And this this is kind of interesting. It actually, so the three specific kinds of teachings that accord with different capacities that are mentioned is the Dharma of contemplation of impurity, the Dharma of dependent origination, and the Dharma of Chan, that is Zen meditation. And we might talk about this a little bit more. Okay, the eighth wheel is that. So this was the Buddha being able to teach people of different capacities, but there's an assumption here that these are all basically good candidates for being Buddhists. Okay, but in the next wheel is about how the Buddha not only teaches beings in accordance with their different capacities, but that, and this is kind of an important point, but that the Buddha's teachings are intended to enable all of these beings to become Buddhas in their future lives. And so the reason why I think this is kind of important is because there's a lot of emphasis in Mahayana Buddhism on the use of skillful means, or upaya, different kinds of teachings for different people. And there's a certain kind of inclusivity and that in that approach, so that different people can find their own gate into the Dharma, which is good. But what can happen sometimes is that people think, oh, this is the gate to the Dharma. But what the Buddha is emphasizing here in the eighth wheel is that as good as it is to find one's own a way of relating to the Dharma, that you have to keep going. Basically, that the point is to pursue the Dharma up to the point of becoming a Buddha yourself, which is one of the main distinctive things about Mahayana Buddhism, as opposed to anything that isn't Mahayana Buddhism. But in addition to kind of generically being able to have different teachings that are suited to people of different capacities, and ensuring that regardless of what teaching people respond to, that they are being brought along on the path to Buddhahood, there's also people who are just bad, okay? But those people are also have their own wheel. The ninth wheel is using expedient means. The Buddha is able to teach even beings who have committed the 10 evil deeds even slandering the Dharma. As a result, these evil beings are unable to walk toward the wholesome paths. And then the tenth wheel. Let's see. In the Buddha's past life, while he was still a bodhisattva, he was already aware of the countless illnesses and sufferings of the Saha world, which is where we are. So as a bodhisattva, he sprinkled upon the heads of living beings the water of great compassion, washing away their worries and enabling them to give rise to a sense of shame and remorse for the past wrongdoings. When the Buddhas of the 10 directions saw this, they judged that the Buddha to be had perfected all blessings and virtues and was a jewel of the Dharma, or a Dharma vessel, with the capacity to save and deliver human beings. So all the Buddhas of the 10 directions came to the aid of this bodhisattva, helping him to accomplish Buddhahood, attain unsurpassed Dharma, and become a great Dharma king. And so this is a little interesting. I mean, sometimes people say, oh, Buddha is the thing that is different about a Buddha as opposed to an Arhat or a Bodhisattva or any other kind of being, is that a Buddha does it on their own. This is saying that it's not true, which is one of the advantages of having lots of Buddhas, that when it's your turn, when you're a Bodhisattva who's right about, getting close to becoming a Buddha, all the other Buddhas can help you. Or at least that's what it's saying in the 10th wheel. So all the Buddhas of the 10 directions came to the aid of this bodhisattva, helping him to accomplish Buddhahood, attain the unsurpassed Dharma, and become a great Dharma king. At that time, because as a bodhisattva he had developed sufficient wisdom and blessing, and because he was so courageous and vigorous, he realized Buddhahood. Once he realized Buddhahood, the Buddha always had a company of followers, 1,250 bhikshus who followed him no matter where he went or where he spoke the Dharma. This ability to win the support of all the Buddhas throughout the 10 directions when he was a bodhisattva is analogous to a wheel-turning sage king being accompanied by the train of his 1,000 sons. Then I think he says a little bit more about the 1,000 sons. Yeah, just as the wheel-turning sage king has 1,000 sons, so did the Buddha. Why? If you pay... So I don't know about this, and I think this isn't quite right, but it says if you pay close attention, you will notice that every time the Buddha spoke the Dharma, he was always followed by 1,000 bhikshus who symbolize 1,000 sons. From this, we can see that every Buddha has many disciples. This is the 10th wheel of the Buddha analogy, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what is going on here. After kind of explaining the 10 wheels, this summary of the sutra goes on to say, then the Buddha descended into the heavenly realm, into the human realm, where he proceeded to teach and transform living beings. He taught his disciples how to steady both their bodies and minds, and then he taught them how to cultivate the way. This enables us to see both the systematic and sequential methods used by the Buddha in his teaching and to see how much wisdom he had. He brought peace to living beings and comfort to their souls, which is nice. And it isn't really, emphasized here, but this is before you get enlightened. Okay, this isn't something that you only get once you are a fully enlightened Buddha. The Buddha is able to bring peace and comfort to practitioners when we need it. We don't need peace and comfort once we're enlightened. Okay, it's an important point. I think the Buddha taught Earth Store Bodhisattva to do exactly the same as he had done to teach living beings in the world. Yada yada yada, and so this last part here is a central part of many of the ideas about Earth Store Bodhisattva, that he is kind of taking over for the Buddha, and a lot of the teachings about Kshitigarbha, and this is kind of a segue into the subject of the Sanjie Jiao sect, which I'll talk about momentarily, but that in the Dharma ending age, where the Buddha has been gone for a long time, and beings are, it can feel like we're living in an age without a Buddha, and actually Kshitigarbha is there to kind of fill that gap. Okay, So the summary that I just gave actually only gives half of what is discussed in each of the wheels. For each of the 10 wheels, there is both a wheel of the Buddha, which is what I was focusing on just now in the summary that I was presenting, which is based upon Master, what was his name again? Heng Yi? Heng Yi, Master Heng Yi's summary. But he also gives a summary of the other half of each wheel, which is the wheel using the analogy of a king. And actually, the word for analogy in Chinese is a little interesting. It is two characters. One character means compare, and the other character means to explain. So the literal meaning of the Chinese word for analogy is to explain using a comparison, which is exactly what an analogy is. So why use an analogy of a king or with a king? So one reason is that Mara is often portrayed as an evil ruler, and by analogy, the Buddha is a good ruler. But another reason to talk about kings is because kings are often employed as, if you want to have just a representative of lay people in general, for some reason, in Buddhist literature, kings are often chosen as representatives. In particular, in the life of Siddhartha, he had to choose between becoming a king himself or becoming a renunciate and going on the path to Buddhahood. But in the specific case of the Sutra on the 10 Wheels, there's something, it's not something else, but something a little bit more specific is going on. It's not always completely clear, but the king, the analogy with the king is usually a more practical illustration of the teaching that's involved in the Sutra on the 10 Wheels for each of the wheels. So let's take, for example, the second wheel, where I said it specifically mentions three kinds of practices: meditation, chanting and sutra recitation, and making offerings with the blessings that ensue from offerings. In the analogy of the king for this wheel, the three practices are that the king establishes an army to protect the kingdom, that the king ensures that the people have adequate housing and land to farm, and that the king makes sure that people are provided with an education, and especially a very practical kind of education, so that they are able to take care of themselves and to prosper. And so, I don't know. I mean, if you look at it, you can try to see how the three practices of meditation, chanting and sutra recitation, and making offerings and receiving blessings for them correspond to those. I don't know. I haven't actually worked that out in my mind, how those really correspond to each other. But that's the way the teaching is presented. In the sixth wheel, the Buddha taught his students how to steady their minds and easily enter into samadhi. And when the malicious dragons and other living beings harboring evil thoughts saw how easily the Buddhist students entered into samadhi, they gave rise to faith in the Dharma, and their minds were naturally subdued. Hence, their blessings increased, and they started to protect and support the Dharma. In the corresponding analogy of the king fortified the defenses of the kingdom and thus freed his subjects from fear. The citizens of his kingdom did not have to worry about being invaded. Moreover, they became nice to each other when they weren't worried about being invaded. They cooperated with each other, got along well. As a result, they lived happily and contentedly. So the analogy of the king serves to relate practical and mundane measures, but these measures also have results that transcend simply the mundane. Okay. Now, in addition, Master Heng Yi also has two articles, and here's the link to the first one right here. If you click on this link, to the teachings about meditation that are found in the Sutra on the 10 Wheels. I should ask, does anybody have any questions at this point? just seemed like I've been talking for a while, so I want to check. Okay, so in the third chapter of the sutra, which is entitled Non-Reliance Practices, which is kind of a strange title, in my opinion, but it introduces us to, there's a deva that appears in the, who appears named Deva Garbha, heavenly treasury. The deva asks the Buddha, what should living beings do if they want to cultivate samadhi power? That is Chan, Zen. The Buddha praises the deva for asking such a good question, because of all practices, Chan Samadhi, which is a little redundant, but that's the way it's written in Chinese. There's a character for Zen, there's a character for Samadhi, is the most important. And so these are the 10. Actually, there's 20 altogether, but these are the first 10. Ensure that you have adequate food, clothing, and other necessities so that your mind isn't distracted by their lack. Which is not what I would have expected for the very first thing to make sure of if you want to be a good Zen student. But it's kind of, it's a little, kind of brings you back down to earth. Oh, I want to practice Zen. What do I need? Well, make sure you're not starving. You have a roof over your head. You're taking care of yourself. Follow the precepts. That's the second one. Another thing that kind of brings you back down to earth. Follow the precepts. Cultivate practical intelligence. This is kind of interesting. Basically, in this one, it's saying, it's another thing that kind of brings you back down to earth. You should know how, you should understand how things work in a practical way before you get too far in your. These are all kind of, these are all ways of making sure that the person who wants to practice meditation has their act together, basically. Of course, this is a long time before the phrase spiritual bypassing came along. But sometimes people want to meditate instead of doing the things that they need to do. Meditation can help us. So the fourth thing that you need is to calm your mind. Well, wait a minute, I thought meditation was supposed to calm my mind. Well, guess what? A lot of times when you meditate, it doesn't calm your mind. So you've got to already kind of have some calmness of mind. Okay, so don't speak divisively, avoid harsh speech, speak truthfully. Again, these are pretty basic things. Don't be covetous, greed, hatred, and study the Dharma means overcome ignorance. So greed, hatred, and anger. So greed, hatred, and ignorance. So the last three of these correspond to the three of the four kinds of verbal conduct in accord with the Dharma, and all of the three kinds of mental conduct in accord with the Dharma that are found in the Salayika Sutra and many other basic Buddhist teachings. But this essentially points to conduct with respect to body, speech, and mind that are important for ensuring that one has success in the practice of meditation. But there's 10 more. But wait, there's more. And these are things to not be attached to. Don't be attached to worldly undertakings. So there's another one further down. Don't be attached to making money. So this is more general. Don't be attached to success and fame. Don't be attached to words. Don't be attached to sleep. Don't be attached to making money. And now it's don't be attached to physical beauty, the way things appear. Don't be attached to beautiful sounds. Don't be attached to beautiful smells. Don't be attached to delicious food. I'm losing interest in meditation as I read this list. Don't be attached to physical comfort and any sort of pleasant physical sensations. And the last one, this one, I got the question marks next to this. Don't be attached to finding something, and don't be obsessed over things that you find. And so this is kind of very, you could think of this as being very Zen. Don't be looking for something. And another translation of the same thing is don't be looking for something. And that is why? Well, because if there's a nice teaching once you realize that the Buddha is not somewhere else, then you can see the true Buddha. If you're looking somewhere else, if you're looking for something, then yeah, that's a distraction. That's something to not be attached to. And in my opinion, the two most important things about the way the Sutra and the Ten Wheels talks about meditation is that the Buddha places a very, very high value on the practice of meditation. And it's also a very practical approach to what do you do if you want to practice meditation. It's a lot of very practical things to look at. Okay, so now I want to ask again if there's any questions, because I'm going to change gears a little bit, spend the rest of the time that we have starting to get a little bit into some of the really interesting things that Zhiru Ng starts bringing up in the next chapter, including this very interesting movement that occurred in China back around the 6th century, the Sanjie jiao. So who here has heard of the Sanjie jiao? The reason why you haven't heard of the Sanjie jiao is they were suppressed, and of course that's one of the things that makes them very interesting. What were they doing? They were kind of subversive. Anyway, okay. So according to Zhiru Ng, so what do they have to do with Dizang? And for a while, modern scholars thought that the Sanjie jiao school played a major role in the early initiating interest in China in Dizang. So, all right. So as I say, modern scholarship attributes the initial dissemination of Dizang cult to the teachings of the three levels Sanjie jiao. That's what Sanjie jiao means. 3 levels, although it could also mean the 3rd level. Anyway, and cites Longmen sculptures, and Longmen is another one of these caves. Okay, so there's more caves coming up in chapter 2 if you like cave art, and inscriptions as examples of Dizang worship in the 7th century. So here I have spoiler alert. By the end of this chapter, which is chapter 2 now, Zhiru Ng is prepared to caution us that one must be very wary of attributing the rise of Dizang cult solely her emphasis to Sanjie jiao activities, and also it is probable that Dizang piety existed in the 7th century as one of several growing modes of Buddhist devotion. This is my emphasis prior to its association with Sanjie jiao. And so again, Sanjie jiao is important to understand the early, or at least in this early phase of the Dizang cult, or whatever you want to call it, interest in Dizang among Chinese Buddhists, but the role of Sanjie jiao is probably overemphasized by many scholars. Now, what is Sanjie jiao? The 3-level school. It's founded by a guy named Xing Xing, also known as Sing Sing. These are his dates. These are how you spell his name in Chinese. And he tells us, since he's the founder of this group, it's good to know what he himself said Sanjie jiao means. And he wrote a work, The Practice That Arises in Accord with the Capacity. So this is all about making one's practice be aligned with one's own capacity, or teaching people practices that are aligned with their capacity. And so the capacity is also level. So the level that people on corresponds to different capacities. And usually there's lots of lists like this in Buddhism, and people often make the mistake of thinking, oh, they want to be in the group with the highest capacity. Those are always the hardest practices. What you really want is to be in the group with the lowest capacity, because that's where the easy practices are, in my opinion. Okay, so these 3 levels also correspond, and I'll just barely have time to talk about this a little bit, to the 3 stages, or the 3 phases, or the 3 times of the Dharma. So in the time immediately after, while the Buddha was teaching, and immediately afterward, the people were on the first level, most people, regardless of whether they dwell in communities or remote mountains, whether in quiet or exotic places, quiet or chaotic places, they will attain the way. So basically, they had few restrictions on how they could practice. Beings on the second level, and this corresponds to the period after the Buddha had died, entered parinirvana, but before the Dharma ending age, which is in the third. During this time, it's only appropriate for people to practice in quiet places, not in communities. I don't understand. I don't know enough about Jing's teaching or Sanjie Jiao to know why he felt this way, but this is what he said. The third level, the people of the lowest capacity, which also corresponds to people who were born a long time after the Buddha died, which Jing considered himself to be in that time, and many people think that whether Jing was right, we probably are in that time now. As for a place of liberation of sentient beings on the third level, who have wrong views of emptiness and existence, they must reside in communities. It is not suitable for them to stay at ease and quiet in remote mountains. Okay, and this is quoted from a nice article by a fellow named Lin Peiying on Jing. Has a lot of good information on Jing if you're looking for stuff. I think you can find this online to download as a PDF. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more before we end. Let's see. Oh yeah, just a little bit about Jing's biography. His mother was a pious Buddhist who prayed to Kuan Yin for a son and had been unable for many years to conceive children. But finally she did after praying day and night to Kuan Yin. Her son was very bright but not particularly interested in religion as a young person. But then at some point, he did become not only a very fervent Buddhist practitioner, but also a teacher and a leader. It's often the case to sort legend from truth or to get historical facts from Buddhist biographies of great teachers. This is made much worse by the fact that the movement that Xing founded was branded as a dangerous heresy, and within a few years of his death, his writings were officially proscribed. And I'll talk more about this in our next meeting, but like for a long time, nobody knew about Sanjie Jiao. The suppression of Sanjie Jiao was pretty successful. The suppression mostly consisted of simply labeling the writings that were associated with Sanjie Jiao as heretical and not copying them, not distributing them, and stashing them away in back rooms, where some of them were eventually discovered relatively recently. Okay, so I think, yeah, so it is 8:15. The Sanjie Jiao is really interesting for a number of reasons. If you're interested in dangerous heresies, it's interesting for that. If you're interested for things that people didn't know about for a long time and then suddenly discovered, that's interesting. If you're, but they do have some really interesting ideas as well, and they were involved in the early promotion of Dizang Bodhisattva as an important Bodhisattva. And we'll talk a lot more about that in our next class. Actually, I think our next class is in 3 weeks, because I think this is another month that has 5 Tuesdays in it. Is that right? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's right. So our next class on Zhiru Ng's book will be in 3 weeks. Are there any questions, final questions, or anything anyone wants to bring up? Okay, then we will end by, let's see, I don't have it here. I have the morning bell chant, but we won't do the morning bell chant. We will instead do the 4 great vows. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. Delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to attain it. May whatever excellent qualities we have gained from this practice be extended for the benefit of all beings. Thanks everybody for coming. It's great to see you. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.